She laughed, clinked her glass, and told the whole table I was just a driver. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply slid my wedding ring off my finger, placed it on the table in front of her, and walked out. Before I tell you the full story, don't forget to hit subscribe, tap the like button, and drop a comment. Stories like this one are raw, unforgettable, and they'll keep you hooked until the very end. My name is Michael, and I've been married to my wife, Laura, for nearly 10 years. We met in college, back when everything was simple and every dream felt within reach. I believed in her, supported her, built a life with her. I thought I knew who she was. But on the night of her sister's wedding, I saw a side of her I'll never forget. It was a grand wedding. Laura's family had gone all out, renting a historic hotel ballroom with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and a string quartet playing softly in the background as guests sipped champagne. I wore my best suit, a tailored gray one I had picked up just for the occasion. I felt proud walking in with Laura on my arm, proud to be part of her family's celebration. For most of the evening, things went smoothly. I greeted her parents warmly, congratulated her younger sister Rachel and her new husband, mingled politely with cousins and old family friends. I'm not the kind of man who steals attention in a room, but I know how to hold myself with dignity. I thought Laura and I were aligned, partners as we had always been. But that illusion shattered at the reception dinner. We were seated at a long table with Rachel's friends, many of them dressed in designer clothes, talking about careers, vacations in Europe, and expensive hobbies. One of the men leaned toward me with a friendly smile and asked, "So, Michael, what do you do?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Laura cut in first. She raised her glass, smirked, and said, "Oh, don't ask him. He's just a driver." The words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. At first, I thought maybe I'd misheard her. But then I saw the smirks, the awkward chuckles, the way a few guests glanced down at their plates. My face burned hot, but not from shame, from disbelief. She had said it casually, almost playfully, as if humiliating me in front of strangers was nothing more than a party trick. In that moment, I didn't hear the music, I didn't see the twinkling lights of the ballroom. I didn't even notice the food in front of me. All I felt was the crushing realization that the woman I had given my life to saw me as nothing more than a punchline. She had stripped away my dignity with one sentence, and she did it with a smile. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't give her or anyone else the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, I looked at her, steady and silent, then slid the gold band from my finger. It felt heavier than it ever had before. I placed it on the white linen tablecloth, right in front of her champagne glass. The clink of metal on glass was louder than the music, louder than the chatter, louder than her laughter. She froze, her smile fading, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. Without a word, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of the legs against the marble floor echoed through the room. Heads turned, whispers rippled down the table, but I didn't meet anyone's eyes. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out of that ballroom. No one moved to stop me. No one dared. That night, I walked into the cool air outside with nothing but my pride intact. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally done something for myself, something that couldn't be taken back. When I stepped out of that ballroom, the night air hit me like a wave, cool and sharp, cutting through the noise that still clung to my ears. I could hear faint laughter and music spilling out of the hotel doors behind me, but I wanted nothing to do with it. I loosened my tie, walked across the parking lot, and got into my car. I didn't even start it right away. I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the dashboard, replaying every second of what had just happened. I had given Laura 10 years of my life, and in one careless moment, she reduced me to nothing more than a joke. She hadn't just embarrassed me, she had revealed who she really was. For the first time, I saw her not as my wife, but as someone who thought my worth was tied to the punchline she fed to strangers. That realization cut deeper than her words. I drove home in silence, the road lit only by street lamps and the occasional passing car. Every mile felt heavier than the last. When I pulled into our driveway, I didn't bother bringing anything inside. I walked through the front door, straight into the bedroom, and noticed how everything looked suddenly foreign. The framed wedding photo on the dresser, her perfumes lined up neatly by the mirror, the throw blanket she loved on the bed. All of it felt like props in a play I didn't want to perform in anymore. I packed a small bag with only what I needed, a few shirts, jeans, my toothbrush, and left. That house wasn't mine anymore. It was a cage built on illusions, and I wasn't going to sleep under its roof another night. I stayed at a modest motel for a few weeks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. I spent those nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself how I'd let it get this far. I remembered the early years when Laura and I first met. Back then, she was charming, sweet, and she made me feel like we were a team against the world. But slowly, as the years passed, I noticed her craving more status, recognition, prestige. She started surrounding herself with people who cared about appearances, and I realized she was molding herself into someone I barely recognized. I told myself it was just a phase, that she still loved me the same, but the truth was she had been slipping away for a long time. That night at the wedding was only the final unveiling. The calls started the very next morning. First from her, then from her mother, then from her sister. My phone lit up constantly with messages ranging from confusion to anger. "Where are you? We need to talk. You embarrassed Laura in front of everyone." Embarrassed her. That was the phrase that sent me over the edge. As if my silent act of dignity was worse than her cruel joke. I ignored them all. I knew that if I answered, they'd try to twist the story, make me doubt myself, make me feel guilty for not playing along with their version of respectability. I wasn't going to give them that power. A week later, Laura showed up at the motel. She knocked on my door for 15 minutes straight until I finally opened it. She looked tired, disheveled, like the confident mask she wore at the wedding had cracked. She didn't apologize, not really. Instead, she said, "You're overreacting. It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "Why are you making this so dramatic?" That was when I realized how far gone we were. To her, my dignity was nothing. To her, I was supposed to laugh along while she chipped away at my worth. I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't believe me at first, thought I was bluffing, thought I'd eventually crawl back. But when I handed her the papers a month later, the shock in her eyes told me she finally understood. Those months after the separation were the hardest of my life, but also the most transformative. I had to rebuild everything. My sense of self, my routines, my future. I threw myself into work, driving long hours, saving money, slowly climbing towards something better. Every mile I drove became a step away from who I had been and closer to who I wanted to become. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that was enough. One night, about 6 months later, I sat down in my apartment with a small notebook and started writing down goals. Simple ones at first: pay off debts, upgrade my car, move into a better place. But as the weeks went on, the goals grew bigger. I wanted more than survival. I wanted success, independence, respect. Not from Laura, not from her family, but from myself. I wanted to prove to myself that I was more than the punchline of someone else's cruel joke. And with every passing month, I got closer to those goals. The man who had walked out of that ballroom broken was gone. In his place was someone new, someone sharper, someone who no longer needed validation from anyone who didn't value him. The months rolled forward like a tide that refused to stop, and with each new day, I carved out a version of myself that Laura would never recognize. I started waking up earlier, before dawn, forcing myself into a routine of discipline I had long neglected. I ran through the quiet streets, my breath clouding in the early morning air, pushing myself harder each time. At first it was just a way to silence the anger that burned in me, but slowly it became fuel, shaping me into a man who could no longer be dismissed as just a driver. I saved every dollar I could, working shifts that left me exhausted but determined. Every mile I drove, every passenger who slid into the back seat of my car, became another brick in the foundation of the life I was building. I began to see progress, and progress is a drug that can change a man. By the end of that year, I had paid off my debts, bought a better car, and upgraded my apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, every inch of it a reminder that I had built something with my own two hands. On my nights off, I started reading again, devouring books on business, finance, and personal growth. It was as though I had rediscovered a hunger I didn't know I had. I realized that for too long, I had allowed Laura's version of success to define me, her constant comparisons to others, her obsession with appearances. Now, I wanted my own version of success, one rooted in strength, independence, and dignity. There were days when doubt crept in, when I would think back to the wedding and hear her voice again. laughing at my expense. But instead of letting it break me, I used it as motivation. Each time I heard those words in my head, I pushed harder, ran farther, worked longer. I turned her insult into my fuel. And slowly, that fuel drove me to places I hadn't imagined. I began networking with people I met through work, passengers who weren't just fares but opportunities. A man I once drove to the airport offered me advice on starting a small transport business. Another introduced me to a mechanic who gave me a good deal on servicing my car. Piece by piece, I was laying the groundwork for something bigger than just surviving. At the same time, I cut out the people who tried to drag me back into the past. Laura had tried calling a few more times, but I never answered. Her family occasionally left messages, all of them dripping with condescension or fake concern. I deleted them without hesitation. I knew their game. They wanted me to play the role of the fool, the one who came crawling back, grateful for scraps of attention. That man no longer existed. Diane, one of Laura's cousins who had always been kind to me, reached out once, saying she admired what I was doing and hoped I was okay. She was one of the few from that family who had ever treated me like more than a prop at their events. I thanked her, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to let anyone from that circle back into my life. And yet, as I built my new path, I couldn't help but hear whispers about Laura. Friends of friends told me she wasn't the radiant woman she pretended to be anymore. Mark, one of her family's friends, mentioned casually that Laura looked thinner, pale, always on edge, like the world she had tried to craft around herself was crumbling. I didn't take joy in that news, not exactly. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the woman who had once tried to make me small was now shrinking in her own world. I didn't need to witness it. Life was showing her what I had already learned. You can't build happiness on the ruins of someone else's dignity. The transformation in me was not just financial or physical, it was spiritual. I began to walk differently, shoulders squared, eyes steady. People noticed. Strangers treated me with more respect. Even the simplest conversations carried a weight they hadn't before because I believed in myself in a way I never had. Confidence is a strange thing. It doesn't have to be shouted. It radiates quietly, changing how others see you without you saying a word. I kept pushing forward, month after month, and eventually I bought something I had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. A luxury car, sleek and shining, the kind of car that makes people turn their heads when you drive past. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement. A statement to myself that I had arrived somewhere new, somewhere powerful. That car wasn't about showing off to the world. It was about proving to myself that I could, that I had risen from the ashes of humiliation and built something undeniable. By the time the year turned, I had become a man I barely recognized, and I liked him. Gone was the timid, overlooked husband who let his wife's words define him. In his place stood someone sharper, harder, and far more alive. I wasn't chasing Laura. I wasn't trying to win her back. She had lost me the moment she mocked me at that wedding. What I was chasing was freedom, respect, and a life that belonged to me and me alone. And then one day, an invitation arrived. Another family gathering, another celebration, the kind of event Laura's relatives loved to flaunt. I almost tossed it aside without a thought. But something in me paused. Something told me that maybe, just maybe, it was time to walk back into that world, not as the man they mocked, but as the man I had become. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally decided. At first, I thought it wasn't worth my time. Another one of Laura's family's endless celebrations where people measured each other by clothes, careers, and the size of their vacations. But the more I looked at that gold-trimmed card, the more I realized it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. A year earlier, I had walked away from them broken and silent, leaving a ring on a table and disappearing into the night. They hadn't seen the man I had become since then. They hadn't seen the strength, the success, the quiet fire that burned in me now. I wasn't going back for validation. I was going back because I wanted to. Because this time, the story would be different. The day of the event arrived, and I made sure everything about me spoke to the life I had built. I wore a tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes that caught the light with every step. My watch gleamed on my wrist, understated but unmistakably fine. And then there was the car. Sleek, black, powerful, the kind of machine that announced itself the second it turned onto the street. As I pulled up to the venue, heads turned. Valets straightened their posture, guests paused mid-conversation. I stepped out calmly, unhurried, my movements steady. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. Inside, the atmosphere was just as I remembered. Chandeliers, chatter, laughter layered with judgment, people trying too hard to impress. I walked through the room like I belonged there, because now I did. Conversations quieted when they saw me, familiar faces turning with recognition, whispers trailing behind me. I saw her before she saw me. Laura. She was standing with a group of cousins near the buffet table, her smile painted on, her posture strained. When her eyes finally landed on me, her face drained of color. Her glass trembled slightly in her hand, though she tried to mask it with a quick sip. Mark, a family friend, tried to cover the tension with a forced laugh and a comment about my car. Others nodded, curious but wary. I didn't engage in their chatter. I kept moving with calm precision, greeting those who deserved it, shaking hands firmly, offering a polite smile where it was due. The room was mine without me having to claim it. When I finally stopped near Laura's table, the silence was heavy. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. For a year, I had imagined this moment, and now that it was here, I realized I didn't need anger, I didn't need explanations. I leaned in just slightly, enough for only her and those closest to hear, and said softly, "Now you have another driver." Her face froze, her eyes wide, and for the first time, she had nothing to say. Not a joke, not a defense, not even a whisper. I straightened, adjusted my cuff, and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight of my words hung in the air long after I had moved on, settling into the minds of everyone at that table. They all knew what I meant. They all remembered the night she had mocked me, and now they had seen the man she had thrown away. As the night carried on, I stayed only long enough to make my presence known. I didn't overstay. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My life spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. When I left, I walked out with the same quiet confidence I had walked in with. The sound of my car's engine roaring into the night, a final reminder that I had risen above them. Driving away, I felt no bitterness, no anger, no regret. Only peace. The ring I had left behind a year ago wasn't a symbol of loss anymore. It was a symbol of rebirth. Laura had tried to reduce me to a joke, but all she did was hand me the fire I needed to rebuild myself into something greater. That night, as the city lights blurred past, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never again let anyone define me by their shallow words. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this one are only the beginning, and I promise you, there's always more to tell.